Xiao was one of the first DPS released in Genshin Impact and was considered one of the Liyue Big Three alongside Ganyu and Hu Tao, with a lot of the community calling them the top 3 DPS in the game at the time. He went on quite a roller coaster since then, some calling him mid, bad, power crept, and others countering that he was underrated. Whatever the truth was at the time, however, he's received a ton of buffs in the last 2 regions, and if you can assemble the exodia of pieces that support Xiao, he can be an extremely powerful DPS, and versus the right content, one of the very best in the game. But Xiao is also not without faults, downsides, and opportunity costs, so let's talk about whether he's worth it for you and how to build and play him right if you decide to get him. Welcome to Jello Impact, where we build and test every single character to help you decide who you want to wish for and build. Xiao is an on-field Anemo hyper carry DPS. Being a hyper carry means that he does a huge percentage of his team's damage, which means that he needs great artifacts and weapons and team buffers that can amplify his very high multipliers. He's obviously a plunge DPS that relies on his burst, which transforms his normal attacks into special Anemo infused attacks with extremely high plunge multipliers and a truly wild amount of AoE. His burst has a pretty high cost and a very long duration, so both have to be played around, his supports needing to provide him energy as well as giving himself sufficient energy recharge, in addition to ideally lasting a long time. He's also relatively easy to play. You don't need to do fancy combos or mechanically intensive tech to get a large amount of damage out of Xiao. There are certainly some higher skill optimizations you can make, which we will talk about, but by and large he will generally perform well regardless. Plunges count as heavy attacks, so combined with the swirl the Anemo activates, he actually is reasonably serviceable at breaking elemental shield. His free-to-play friendliness is probably his biggest downside. His best supports are C6 Farazan, which is obviously very hard to get, as well as other premium 5-star characters or high-demand units like Bennett. He doesn't have any great free-to-play or even 4-star weapon options, although at least his signature weapon is potentially available from the standard banner if you get lucky. He also requires very heavy artifact investment, and fortunately recently did get a good resin efficient option in the Mariachi Band Hunter artifact set, although this does have some anti-synergy with his usual signature weapon. Although I would say he does have one overall best team, he does have a large number of options if you're missing one or more of these perfect supports, so let's get into his teams now. I want to give a huge shout out to Kai in my Discord, along with all the other wonderful people in the Discord that offered to let me use their Xiao as testing, as Hoyo hasn't rerun Xiao in over a year, and my channel started just a year ago, so I have not had a chance to get him on my account. Obviously I will as soon as he comes, but I did want to make sure I tested him and all his best teams to make sure I could give my own personal thoughts on Xiao as well as the community consensus. And generally the community consensus is that his best in slot team is C6 Farazan, Farina, and Shen Yun, and that was very much what I found as well. The team just works perfectly together. Farina does a couple things. Not only does she provide a large amount of buffing for Xiao, but she also does really good off-field damage, and her buffs and damage last a really long time. It's really nice to have someone that actually does provide off-field damage and have a secondary damage dealer, because Xiao is obviously very reliant on his burst. So if an enemy just has maybe a quarter of their health or a little bit of their health left, finishing them off by starting a whole new Xiao burst can really mess things up. So having Farina that can finish off enemies with her skill that doesn't require energy to do is really, really good. Farazan at this point feels to me like a must on Xiao comps if you really want to max him out. The utility she provides is absolutely ludicrous, providing resistance shred for Anemo damage, providing a huge amount of crit damage, obviously all this at C6, and providing a large amount of energy that really, really helps with Xiao's ER needs. I pretty much had no ER issues with my Xiao with just 115 ER or so when using Farazan on the team. So C6 Farazan, absolutely fantastic partner, and it seems like they're finally willing to run Farazan not on just Wanderer banners. She appeared on the Shen Yun banner, which is great because Shen Yun is also an incredible partner for Xiao. Obviously she buff lunge damage by quite a lot, so that's very, very noticeable. It's not as much buffing as Bennett gives when you're in single target, or sorry, when you're in AoE, but Bennett does restrict you to circle impact, which means that if you have to leave the circle, or if you slightly mess up your rotations because his burst doesn't last Xiao's whole duration, Xianyun can come out ahead, even in AoE. In addition to that, you get much more consistent Farina stacks. It's just a much more comfy team to play overall, because if you leave the Bennett circle, you also lose healing. So overall, I just found that this team be a much more consistent option, both in AoE and in single target. So personally, after trying them out, this was by far my favorite team for Xiao. That's not to say that it's the only team for Xiao. Xiao has actually a good number of partners that he can make work, but they will all be downgrades in one way or another. And so whichever pieces of these you don't have, you just want to find the best other supports you can to fill those roles. So you'll obviously need a healer because Xiao drains his HP quite a lot. So using Bennett is a good idea, especially since he's also a buffer. Using Zhongli can be really nice for the Animo Shred, as well as the interruption resistance. Jean can be a great healer, as well as doing good Animo damage. And if you do have her C4, which the account I tested on did, she provides further Animo Shred. I will say one thing I noticed when I was testing the different teams with Xiao is it doesn't really feel like you're making different teams. It just feels like you're swapping out different pieces. And as long as they fit together in a reasonably comfortable way, and as long as you play the rotations properly, then you're sort of good to go. Like, you know, if you don't have Xianyun, well, you need another healer, so you can put in Jean. Maybe you want to play Bennett for that extra buffing. This is a bit of like, I found this team good, but it is a bit of like a wild team when Farina's taking your HP, Xiao is taking your HP, Bennett's not a team healer. So it is a bit sketchy to play, but it's still really, really good. But you can also say, oh, I don't have Farina, so I'll put Xianyun here, right? And this team works well because Xianyun is, you know, is still buffing and Bennett's still buffing, and you still have Farazan. Or if you don't have Farazan, you can trade her for Zhongli. I don't think I did this team exactly, but I did this one, and this one still felt great. And then I also replaced Xianyun with Jean here. This team still felt good, but kind of the more pieces you kind of take away from the optimal team, the more you start to feel it not being as good. All of these were more than capable of 36 starring very, very easily, but it feels like the more pieces you take away, the worse it feels. So anyways, Bennett, a great option. You can swap him out for any. Jean, a great alternate healer. I especially recommend Jean when you are using with Farina and Farazan and you don't have Xianyun, like if you're not able to get her this patch, if you already had C6 Farazan for some reason, because she does good Animo damage and does further Animo resistance. But the problem is that Xianyun is just better. So it's like, I do recommend working towards this team if you're a Xiao main. It does just feel the best. You can also swap Yelan for Farina. Yelan's just basically like worse Farina. You have to do a normal attack in between your plunges. She gives a lesser buff, you know, but it's all right. Zhongli, an extra comfy option. Sucrose can be an option alternative to Farazan. She can hold the Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayer, which is great. She also batteries Xiao by using her skill a couple times and funneling Xiao, as well as passing that Thrilling Tales at the same time. So that's really, really useful. Lynette is a really good option if you have C6 Farazan especially. So you can do something like this. Lynette's personal damage is actually really good if you happen to have a high constellation Lynette and you want to use her with Xiao. It's one of the best things you could do with Lynette because yeah, high off-field damage, a little bit of extra grouping with her taunt, really, really useful. I wouldn't recommend her as much if you don't have C6 Farazan because a lot of her damage, like her damage gets heavily amplified by Farazan. So this is an option if you don't, you know, want to use Farina. You can use you can't use Farina here because then you don't have a healer. Unfortunate. It would be nice to get that double buff. So I would say that these are sort of the higher value alternate options, and then these are like the less good but still viable options. Shangling is obviously always a good partner to Bennett, but her ER needs are really high, most likely going to extend rotations. Toma can be a decent defensive option. He does buff plunge damage at C6, but it's just going to be worse than Zhongli, worse than other options. Some people kind of feel that you are best off with a shielder for Xiao teams. Maybe it's because I have, you know, good experience with the game overall, but I didn't find myself needing a shielder that badly. I suppose it probably depends on how aggressive the enemies are. The thing is, once you're in your plunge animation, it's almost impossible to be knocked out. So as long as you understand enemy attack patterns a little bit and you get used to Xiao, you generally don't need to play with a shielder, but Zhongli still feels like a really good option on his teams, especially if you don't have Farazan. The Animo Shred he provides is very, very good, and one of the few ways that you can get that if you don't have C6 Farazan. You can use Albedo and sort of do a double Geo sort of thing. Albedo's damage is kind of low, so not that good of an option. Sayu can be sort of a cope alternative to Jean or Xianyun. Fischl does off-field damage. You can use Venti. If you want to use Venti, make sure you use him probably at the beginning of your rotation. He also takes advantage of Farazan's buff, so you'll want to build him on attack damage crit. Xiao can't hit into his burst when he's fully lifting up the enemies, so he's best used against enemies that he can group but can't lift, or if you just use him at the beginning of your rotation, so his burst is basically expired by the time Xiao comes out. It's not the most amazing synergy, but it's decent. You can use Kazuha to group and build him on attack damage crit, but I think both Venti and Kazuha are sort of better utilized on a Wanderer team. You can use Animo MC, you can also use Geo MC if you're using Zhongli, you can use Diona as a healer, Chi-Chi as a healer, Rosari's off-field damage. You can use Raiden to battery Xiao. This was a much more popular thing that people did, both when Raiden first came out and before Xiao had all these other options. These days, like, both Xiao and Raiden have just way better things to do. It's not that she doesn't work at all. It can make it more comfy to battery Xiao, but it's going to extend rotations. You're not going to take advantage, you're not going to be able to take advantage of Bennett's buff with Raiden. It's kind of like Raiden Eula, except that Raiden Eula happens to be Eula's best team. This is no longer Xiao's best or Raiden's best team, and you're just better off to use Raiden on the other side, whether you use her as a hyper carry on the other side or as a hyper bloom activator. I will say the one team that's maybe the least cope is Raiden Farina Xiao, because Farina has decent energy cost, and so does Xiao, and so does Shenyan. So and in addition, Raiden is going to be able to take advantage of some Farina buffs anyways, usually, because you'll still use Farina probably after Raiden because you don't want to waste time. Yeah, I think this would be the least cope version, and I think it's actually pretty good, especially like if you don't have Sucrose, or if you, yeah, I'll have to try this out myself more when I actually get Xiao. I think this also has some value against like assignment, maybe if you're going to use, like if you need that Electro, that could be useful. But other than that, this is sort of just a stopgap on the way to better team for Xiao. Barber can heal and hold the Thrilling Tales. Xingqiu can be sort of a budget Yelan, who's already a budget Farina. And then Baiju, you know, he does heal and provide some interruption resistance, so can be an alternative to Shenyan, kind of, but you know, the Dendro is wasted, so overall not something I recommend, but something that can be used. You can use Xiao Chanel, where you're going to give Xiao a Favonius Lance, and he's going to battery the team. He's going to be on Viridescent Venerer on this team. Farina's going to be vaping her hit, and the team's pretty good. It doesn't make use of Xiao in particular, like a different Animo character is going to be generally better, but it's something you can do, and Xiao's still going to do good. You're still going to build damage for Xiao for damage here, so it's still going to do good damage. It is a bit ER hungry, but Xiao on Favonius Lance, pretty good here. It's kind of like the Sayu team I showcased a while ago, which I really like. So it's a solid team until you get later on, but it's like you're taking up Farina, Bennett, and Shangling. Like there's better things that you can do with all of these characters, but you can definitely do it. I also did give Pyro Xiao a good shot, and it was all right. It didn't perform that well, like it didn't perform as other Xiao comps, but it was definitely a meme, but like it performed good enough to 36 star for sure. Obviously it doesn't even, like, it's completely a ridiculous team, like no one would ever seriously play that, but as a meme it's funny, and it does work. So Pyro Xiao does work, as with any C6 Bennett Shenyan Farina team it does work. For rotations, the main thing to keep in mind is, as usual with rotations, is to use the skills that last the longest first, and make sure you end the rotation with, you know, obviously is Xiao going to be going to town, so for a team like this, you'll use Farina's skill and burst, Shenyan's skill and burst, Faruzan's skill and burst, and then go into Xiao. That way you're getting the max uptime for Faruzan because she has the lowest uptime. It would be the same thing if you swapped Faruzan for Bennett, because he has the lowest uptime. You always want to use Bennett right before Xiao. If you're not using Shenyan and you're going to be using Bennett Faruzan, you'll usually still want to use Faruzan last in Bennett's circle so that Faruzan can take advantage of Bennett's healing and you can gain some more Farina stack. You do still want to use Farina first, and you'll just forget about healing Farina with Bennett. You will get a lot of stacks from Farina regardless, because Xiao is manipulating his own HP and Bennett will be healing it. So that's generally the rotation here. If you're using Zhongli, often he'll be used first in the rotation because his shield lasts a really long time. That's kind of how you want to construct rotations with Xiao. For combos for Xiao in particular, or gameplay in particular, the main thing you'll want to keep in mind is to try and get collision plunges if you can, which means attacking right above the enemy and then you hit them on your way down as well as the plunge damage. I would just watch high level Xiao gameplay, watch a lot of it, not necessarily mine, but watch, you know, speed runs or high level abyss clears to get an idea of how they're positioning their Xiaos and kind of model that. You also have to choose between low and high plunges. So are you going to go all the way up or going to plunge early? If you can collision plunge, you'll almost always want a high plunge, and if you can't, can't and you're in single target, then low plunging can be better. But if you're in AoE, you generally always want to do the high plunge. I would refer to the Kaching Main's guide. They have a combo guide here. It's kachingmains.com. It's the link in the description. And it talks about collision plunges, high and low plunge, the jet combo, which is doing a charge attack in between and normal attack and charge attack in between, which can be optimal for single target. So lots of good stuff there. Personally, I just mashed plunge attacks and that's all I did. And we clapped the abyss and it wasn't even close. So that's what I'm talking about when I say that even if you just mash, Xiao still performs well as long as his investment and teammates are good. But if you really want to maximize things, there's definitely things that you can do. For Xiao's levels, as a hyper carry, you do want to level 90 him eventually because, again, so much of your team's damage relies on his personal stats. So level 90 is where you want to go. Not as high priority as Animo characters focused on Swirl or Hyper Bloom triggers or Hydro Nilu Bloom triggers, but still you want to aim for 90 eventually. His talent levels are extremely important. The main ones that you want to focus on are his burst and his skill, or sorry, his burst and his normal attack. His skill isn't as important. True Xiao mains will be crowning your burst and your normal attack, and you can leave your skill at level 8 or something. I would say level 9 and 9 is the minimum. For hyper carries, you just get so much value out of talent levels, and it's a guaranteed upgrade unlike artifacts or unlike something else. So you really want to make sure that you're maxing those out. For weapons, he scales very highly off of base attack, so it's very important to have a 5-star weapon. Jadewing Spear and Homa are both his best in slot weapons, depending on what you're doing. Jadewing Spear is generally the best, but if you're using him with the Marius Jusei Hunter artifact set, then Homa is almost always going to be better because having crit damage is just going to be a lot better than the crit rate. Homa can be his best in general, especially if he's below 50%, but you can't really rely on that. So assuming he's not below 50%, then his signature is going to be the best. But truth be told, all 5-star weapons perform very well. Vortex Vanquisher performs well if you have a shield. That's Zhongli's weapon. And even outside of a shield, it's not that bad. Calamity Queller, Shenhe's weapon, actually is a really, really good option. Xiao is missing a lot of attack in his stat. He gets a lot of damage percent from his burst. So weapons that give a high base attack, the 5-star weapons, are really, really good for him. Even weapons like Skyward Spine or Engulfing Lightning still outperform any 4-star weapons, even though the energy recharge is wasted on him. Staff of Scarlet Sands, even though it gives EM, is still a better option than all the 4-star options. If you don't have any 5-stars, but you do have the battle pass, the deathmatch is good on him. I think for the rest, you can just take a look at this list and just choose the highest you can. But if you look at the white tassel, right, it's like people say it's his free-to-play option, but like it's like 60% of his signature. It's just so much work. Like Blackcliff, I don't recommend spending Star Glitter on the Blackcliff. I guess if you're truly free to play, to be honest, if you're truly free to play, you either don't get Xiao or you plan to get, you know, Staff of Homa from the weapon banner sometime. That's what I think. For free to play, I personally would never waste Star Glitter on the Blackcliff. When you get stacked, it's not that bad, especially at R5. But yeah, if you happen to have a high refined prospector's drill, that's all right too. Lithic Spear if you're using a leeway team, but I don't like the idea of building a team around a weapon, especially when his best support, Farazan and Farina, you know, only one of his best teammates is actually a leeway team member, so I don't really recommend the Lithic Spear. I personally just highly recommend saving for one of these two weapons when they're on a good weapon banner. You know, use what we have for now, save for one of these two, and even one of these two if they're alongside a weapon banner that you really need the other weapon of. If Calamity Queller, you know, was alongside Mist Splitter like it was a while ago, then that could be a decent option. I wouldn't go for Vortex Vanquisher. It's just like if you happen to get it, then that's a good one to use. And same with these, you know, use them if you have them. And these are basically all just use until you can get a 5-star weapon. I know it might be kind of a hot take, might be kind of a mean take. People are like, no, you can use him free to play. It's like, yes, you can, but it'll feel worse. And I think it's important to know what you're getting into. Like, obviously, you know, yes, you can use anything, but if you want him to feel like a really good character, he benefits more from 5-star weapons than a lot of other DPSs do, and you just have to keep that in mind. For artifacts, Xiao actually has quite a few sets that can be good on him. His general best in slot is either going to be the Vermilion artifact set, which I don't even think I have a single piece of, and I think a lot of people feel that way. It is available in the Strongbox, which is good because you never ever want to farm this in the actual set. The Echoes in the Offering is probably the only like bugged artifact set that doesn't perform well unless your ping is really, really good. So like less than 25 ping is when on this artifact set being good, and it's only good for Yoimiya, you know, kind of Wanderer, obviously Ayato, who it's his signature set for, but pretty much a dead set. So being able to strongbox for Vermilion is very good. Obviously, if you have a great Vermilion set, you should use that. But if you don't, then I highly recommend using a different set. I highly recommend using the Marie-Shisei Hunter set, of course, because, you know, everyone uses this set nowadays, especially when they're with Farina, which they almost always are. But fortunately for Xiao, this is still one of his best sets, even outside of Farina team. So that's really, really nice. It's a universal set for him. When you're using him with Farina, and especially with Shen Yun, it performs just as good, sometimes a little better, sometimes a little worse. I've seen different things versus the Vermilion artifact set. The only thing that you do want to consider, that I would highly consider, is what is your weapon? Because if you're planning on using the Jade Spear, then I don't recommend farming the Marie-Shisei set for him, even though it's so resin efficient, because you can farm for Farina and Xiao at the same time in that set. But using it with the Jade Wing Spear, it's going to be very, very hard to not overcap on crit. If you get God rolls, you can still make it work, but crit rate is pretty much useless, so it's going to be hard to get really good artifact stats. It's the Staff of, if you have the Staff of Homa Xiao, that I would actually recommend that set. And I didn't used to recommend the set for Xiao back before when we had Farina, but now I do. But also there's the Desert Pavilion set, which if you were farming it for whatever reason, this is also a really good set. And this, you do need to hit the opponents with a charge attack to activate the passive. The funny part is the Xiao that I tested in the video, these were the artifact stats, by the way, so they're very, very good stat. This is his overall stat line, and using the Desert Pavilion set. Now, I didn't use the charge attack. I forgot that I was using this set, so I didn't use the charge attack. So the Xiao that I was using did all that damage with just the Animo damage 2-piece. So yeah, definitely not optimal use at all. Even a 2-piece would have been a lot better than what I was doing. So just to let you know that even though the artifact quality of the ones I tested were very, very good, you can make up for some of that quality. Even if you don't have that quality, you can make up for some of it by just using a 4-piece set that actually benefits him. So overall, depending on your weapon, I would recommend number 1, either Marie-Shisei or Vermilion. Then I'd recommend Desert Pavilion. Then I'd recommend 2-piece. So the 2-piece can be a lot of things. It could be Vermilion, it could be Echoes, it can be Gladiator, it can be VV. So you have a lot of choices for the 2-piece. Because of the charge attack restriction, needing to cast 2 charge attacks during your burst can make this fall behind even a 2-piece. So if you happen to have a good 4-piece Desert Pavilion, good, but don't farm for it specifically. You can also use a 2-piece Emblem of Severed Fates, because you do need some ER. So if your stats have no ER, then a 2-piece emblem can be good. I had, as you saw previously, just 110, and with Farazan, or all the teams I tested out, it was enough. Sometimes it felt like a little bit low depending on the team. If they didn't have any Fabs, if I didn't have Farazan, then it felt a little low. So I think generally 120 is enough, and it could be a little lower, a little higher depending on your team. Most important thing is you get your burst up on cooldown. If you don't have it, you either need to adjust your rotation, get C6 Farazan, or get more ER. As I mentioned, you can use Xiao Chanel and also use a VV 4-piece. Otherwise not recommended, but on that team specifically or something like that, you can. One thing to keep in mind, that although Xiao does damage in his elemental burst state like Raiden does, he does not work with the 4-piece artifact set. This does not give him any stats at all. All his damage is third plunge attack damage, so things that give him elemental burst damage do not work. For main stats and substats, you definitely want to go attack % Sands. You can go Animo damage or attack % Goblet and crit rate or crit damage hat. The only reason I say you can use attack % Goblet is, especially if you're using Farina, you get a lot of damage %, and as I said, Xiao gives himself a lot of damage %. So it might actually be sometimes optimal to go with an attack Goblet if you're using Farazan and Farina, especially considering you might have just a better attack Goblet than an Animo damage Goblet. I would go with whatever one has better substat, especially if you are using him with Farina. I did want to give some quick tips on how to build the supports for Xiao. Obviously, you can check out my Shen Yun build guide for the full one, but when used with Xiao, she won't, like a lot of people say that you don't need to use the VV set. And of course, that makes sense, because if you're going to get the most damage out of the team, buffing Xiao or just doing other damage is going to be the best. So even something like Noblesse or the healing set or the clam set or something else you might think would be the best, I still tend to recommend going for VV for a couple reasons. One, because on any other team, she's going to be using VV, so not having to switch around is really good. But more importantly, this will increase Furina's damage. You're going to be swirling Furina. And although Furina doesn't contribute nearly as much personal damage on this team as she does on others, like I mentioned, one of Xiao's big weaknesses is finishing off enemies. And to finishing off enemies, Furina doesn't need to start a new rotation. She just needs to activate her skill. So being able to shred resistance to Hydro will not only increase her damage over the overall rotation, but also increase it in terms of finishing off enemies. So for me personally, I will never take Shen Yun off of EV, even for Xiao, because of this reason. It just helps have another character doing damage rather than just hyper buffing Xiao. Of course, if you just want to see the biggest screenshots possible for Xiao, then, you know, going noblesse or something on Shen Yun to maximize that damage is what you want to do. Farazan, a bit of a different case. By far, generally speaking, the best is going to be the Tenacity of the Millilith artifact set. Through using her burst, it activates her skill, so her skill is proccing over and over, which means you're going to be able to keep up the Tenacity buff. This is a pretty big buff, increasing attack of all party members by 20% over ongoing. Xiao makes very good use of attack buffs, so this buff is really big. This is what I would recommend for Xiao, or for Farazan. But you could build her for personal damage. You could build her on Emblem or something, but I would recommend Tenacity personally. And Bennett, of course, on Noblesse was his best option here. Make sure you have enough ER, and Bob's your uncle. All right, so versus others, how does he stack up versus Wanderer? Now, I'm gonna give you my honest opinion, and this is just my opinion. I don't know if the community has a consensus on this post Shen Yun. I think pre Shen Yun, I think generally people thought Wanderer was a little bit better. After testing Xiao, I prefer Xiao. I think that Xiao is the overall better character. I think that Wanderer, to feel comfortable, requires a shield, but I think his damage takes too much of a hit when you have a shield, and I like the AoE that Xiao provides while also being really strong in single target. Now, Xiao has more caveat. He has to be in his burst state to do damage, whereas Wanderer needs to be in his normal attack state. So you can finish off a wave of enemies with Wanderer in his skill form without starting a whole new rotation, which is really good. Wanderer is also much better for the overworld, like way better. Xiao is pretty awful for the overworld. So to me, Wanderer feels like they both have like very serious pros and cons. For an Abyss character, I prefer Xiao. For overworld, I definitely prefer Wanderer, obviously. Xiao feels more impactful, a bit more fun, but if you don't prefer the plunging playstyle, then obviously that Xiao is not a good pick. So that's just my opinion. I think that Xiao is the better Abyss character by a small margin. I don't think it's a huge margin. I think Wanderer is still I think they're both really good. In terms of overall power and overall value, I think these are some of the harder characters to judge on power because they're so heavily required to have investment. That's the other thing about Wanderer is he has better constellation, right? If we talk about vertical investment, which I'll talk about next, Wanderer has the much better personal damage vertical investment option. So if you want to go for C1, if you want to go for C2, then Wanderer is the better option. In addition, Wanderer has Farazan on his banner pretty much all the time, whereas Xiao doesn't. Thankfully, Xiao had Farazan on Shen Yun's banner, which you're probably going for Shen Yun if you have Xiao. But Wanderer, you know, like I did, I chased for Farazan C6 and ended up getting C1 Wanderer. So yeah, maybe stuff in the future will make, you know, Wanderer the preferred choice, but I do prefer Xiao. It's also nice that Wanderer can be in Bennett's circle getting the buff and he has more range, so it doesn't not affected by circle impact as much. So there are pros and cons. I totally get it if you prefer Wanderer. I found Xiao just outformed personally. I would like to point out though that if you are wishing for C6 Farazan on the Shen Yun banner and you happen to get C1, maybe C2 Shen Yun, she is a really competent plunge DPS herself. I found her perform reasonably close to Wanderer herself at C0. Now, is this backed up by math? Is this backed up by theory crafting? No, but I'll play the footage in the background. You can see how she performed. She was just maybe 5, maybe 10% behind Wanderer in the plunge clears. So if you happen to enjoy the design of Shen Yun and don't enjoy the design of Wanderer or Xiao as much, hyper investing into Shen Yun is something that you can do. I don't think it's the optimal choice. I think both of the other characters are definitely better DPSs, but Shen Yun's close enough that, you know, maybe investing in her C1 for exploration and extra damage, and then maybe investing in Furina is a better choice than investing in Xiao or Wanderer. So take that for what you will. It's just another option. I don't think it's not what I recommend necessarily because there's always better carries than Shen Yun, but if you want, you know, an Animo DPS, you want to wish for Farazan, you may not need to get one of the other two. You can be the judge yourself. And then for value, what is the value of Xiao? I think that he is really impressive in certain Abyss settings settings like the one we have right now. But overall, I think he's a pretty low value character. Pretty high on power level. I'd rank him in A, maybe A minus, depending on how you do your rankings. In terms of power level, I recently split up my A, so I think he's probably on the lower half of A. If you want to check out my tier list, I'll have it at the end, linked at the end. But I just think that there's, you know, he uses Farina, he uses C6 Farazan, he uses Shenyan. These are a lot of high value, expensive characters to use, and I can't confidently say that he uses them the best out of any character with these teams. So I don't think he's a very valuable pull, but I think if you like him, you like his playstyle, you think he's fun, you're okay with investing into him, I think you will not be disappointed. I think he will feel great. I was very pleasantly surprised with how quickly he was up and running and how quickly I was able to do great damage with him. I'm personally very excited to get him, and I do think I'll use him, but I do not recommend him for power or for value, but he does perform well if you invest into him. And speaking of investing into him for vertical investment, the most important thing you want to do for Xiao, as we already talked about it, is getting his 5-star weapon. That is paramount. Number 2, getting his best supports. Make sure you get, like, she's on the banner right now and she has Farazan on the banner. I would prioritize this over getting Xiao. Xiao's banner doesn't look very good. I would wish everything on Shenyu and Farazan to try your best to get C6 Farazan. Of course, you know, if you really want to play with Xiao, then of course make sure you save your guaranteed for Xiao. But eventually, you know, you want to get that C6 Farazan, you want to get her. It sucks. I know. It sucks that you can't guarantee Farazan, that it's a total crapshoot. You may spend all your wishes on her and not even get a single copy. That really sucks. And that is one of the downsides for Xiao, is that Farazan's not on his banner. I think it's kind of better that he's not on his banner though, because you only need 1 copy of Xiao, but the way to invest vertically into him past 1 copy is not with Xiao. Xiao's constellations, unless you're going to go with C6, are pretty much bait. From C2 to C3, C5, pretty much useless. Like, even his talent levels are not that, like, they're good, but they're not great. And his C1 is kind of bait. It gives you a little bit more energy recharge because you can use that extra charge during his burst, but he can only pre-funnel 2 skills into his burst, which means that using 2 skills before your burst is all you'll get. So the 3rd skill has to be used during his burst, which again does reduce his energy a little bit, but it's really not worth it as a constellation. It's nice for the overworld, I will say that, like, nice for exploration, nice for funneling his energy in the overworld, so it could be a good quality of life. But in terms of pure DPS, that's not where you want your resources to go. After you get his optimal team, you want his resources to go into Farina C2, right? Farina C2, absolutely insane. Any character that works with Farina almost definitely wants Farina C2 as part of their vertical investment portfolio. After Farina, you're looking at, well, so Xiao's 5-star weapon, then Farazan C6, then Farina C2, then Shenyan C2, because her C2 is a very big upgrade. Then from there, like, you probably want to C6 Farina before Xiao. You probably want to C6 Shenyan before Xiao. Like, Xiao is personal constellations, he's just an old character, but you know what, he's been buffed so much by new characters that they will support him and the team will be cracked, and it will, like, getting Xenian high constellations will be cracked for him. So yeah, I don't recommend going anywhere near there. I think getting 1 or 2 constellation 2s or constellation 1s that are really high value can be really good. Like, getting Farina C2 I think is something that anyone can consider doing. I think that'll be very high value for your account, and that'll just make your clears, you know, no stress, and it'll make your teams feel amazing. But beyond that, I really wouldn't consider any more, especially after how expensive Farazan and a full 5-star team already is. For future prospects, I really don't know what he could possibly get in the future. This team feels very maxed out. I don't think until the end of Genshin Impact, I think this will be his best team. And the best thing that you can do is just, if you want to max into your Xiao, just work on Farina constellations, Shenyan constellations, Farazan constellations, of course, and then eventually Xiao. His C6 is really cool. I've seen really cool stuff with it, but it's like the constellations on the way to get there are so bad. So for future prospects, I don't see much. And then for Overworld, being a burst reliant character is just really rough, so just make sure you're using a high energy recharge. I would switch to energy recharge Sands, maybe even an energy recharge Polearm, Favonius Lance, and that will be the best way to play him in the overworld. He is good for exploration though with his skill, so at least there's that. Like, getting that, you can use his skill mid-air, so getting that faster than glider mobility is really, really nice. So let me know if you're considering Xiao. Again, if you love him, make sure you invest into him and you won't be disappointed. But if you don't invest to him, it's kind of feels bad being a hyper carry. You know, I don't really recommend Xiao unless you invest into him, but if you do love him, I felt great using him. Check out the video for my tier list, and take care and bye for now.